Alright, chapter 6.5. Again, this is the first part of your last lesson. There's one more thing we have to kind of go over tomorrow. But this lesson here is, again, just to kind of get you an introduction to the main things of what you need to know before we make a slight adjustment. Don't forget that on that worksheet you have, there should be a front and back sided sheet with a blank sheet stapled to it. That is because if we do get to a point where we have some extra time at the end of this video, I'm going to show you some review stuff from the test. And then from that, make sure you hand this thing in. Make sure that you answer the question at the end if you can get to it, which you should be able to get to it, because I am going to stop at a reasonable amount of time. And again, whatever you have, make sure that you hand in so I can give you your credit. Again, if you are here today and you don't give me everything, then you don't get everything that you're supposed to get in terms of points, and it actually hurts you. But again, if you do hand this in, you will be getting a 30 out of 30, and that is a test score. And so what that will do, hopefully for you, since that is a range that's 50% of your grade, it should give you a little bit of insurance in case you don't do so well on this test coming up this week. But again, that's the reason why I'm doing it. So again, just do your job and copy the stuff down and try to figure out what's going on. Everything should be good. First thing we want to be able to do, and there's 5 phases if you haven't looked ahead. First phase is making sure we know how to test 0, 0 with fundamentals, and what that means is don't forget that this is X and this is Y. And so again, write all this down. What you would do is you would put 3 parentheses 0 plus 4 parentheses 0 greater than 12. This would then turn into 0 plus 0 is greater than 12, and of course 0 plus 0 is equal to 0. And so your question here is this true or false? You need to remember that this is like an alligator and that it would always eat the bigger number. And so your question is, would the alligator choose 0 over 12? And I don't think they would. I think they would choose 12. So in other words, you need to make sure you understand that you would put that this is false, or F if that works for you. But you need to make sure you give yourself this answer, because that's going to tell you a lot later on. So again, all you're going to do is test 0, 0. You're going to plug in 0 for X, plug in 0 for Y, see what happens, and all you're going to do at the end of that is see if it's true or false. Alright, so looking at number 2, you're going to turn that into 0 is less than 8 times 0 minus 4. 8 times 0 is obviously 0, minus 4, because anything times 0 is 0. And then 0 minus 4, if you don't know, again, feel free to use this, is negative 4, because again, the 0 just kind of disappears. And so your question is 0 bigger than a negative? Well, here's the thing you have to understand about a number line. 0 is here. There's your 1, 2, and 3. Here's your negative 1, your negative 2, your negative 3. And the larger numbers are typically on the right. The smaller numbers are typically on your left. And so if you're looking at the numbers, notice how every positive number is bigger than 0 because it's further to the right, but also notice how 0 is bigger than every single negative number. So if you're comparing 0 to a negative, 0 would be bigger. Another way to think about it is, would you rather have nothing at all or be in debt? And it's better to have nothing at all, because at least the first dollar you earn is yours, whereas the first dollar you earn if you're in debt goes to the person. So again, this also is false. So again, you might want to write down for yourself, 0 is bigger than negatives. Because that's an important point for you to understand. Again, 0 is smaller than every positive, but it's bigger than every negative. And of course, every positive is bigger than every negative. And so that's something you need to keep in mind. Moving on to number 3, again, what we're going to do here is take this and put 6 parentheses 0 minus 2 parentheses 0 less than or equal to 6. Again, make sure you're writing this down exactly as it is. This turns into 0 minus 0 less than or equal to 6, which of course means 0 minus 0 would be 0 less than or equal to 6. And again, your question is, would this alligator, if this was an alligator, choose the 6 over 0? And I believe it would, because 6 is the bigger number. And so this one here is true. Again, the only thing we're doing this for is to determine whether it is true or whether it is false. So we need to make sure we remember all that, or that we keep that skill in mind, because again, that skill is going to come in handy when we get to the later phases of this worksheet. Last one, y is equal to negative 1/2 x plus 3. Again, put a 0 in for y. There's nothing attached to it, so I could just put a 0 there. Negative 1/2 times 0 plus 3. Again, just for proof, let me show you that negative 1/2 times 0 is 0. So negative 1/2, that's how you type in your fractions in these calculators, is in parentheses using the division sign. Just that sign right there, which of course would make it happen, times 0. Notice that that is also 0. So again, 0 times anything for the most part is 0. So you end up with 0 is less than 0 plus 3. Again, 0 plus 3 is just 3. And again, looking at that, would this alligator choose the 3 over 0? I think that that is also true, because that makes sense. Again, it's only false whenever the alligator, or whenever the symbol is eating a number that it normally would not eat. Alright. Now, the foundational work is plugging in 0, doing all this stuff, but my point to you is that you don't really have to do all this work to check, and so that's why I need you to show this on the first part, but I want you to test 0, 0 with experience if you can. Now again, if doing it with experience the way I'm about to show you doesn't work for you, then feel free to do it the other way, because taking the space is nothing wrong, taking time is nothing wrong, but I would rather show you the way that most people do it, which is actually pretty simple. And the way that we know it is, if you look back at these questions that we did already, when I plugged in 0 for 3x, it just ended up being a 0. 4y just ended up being a 0. Y ended up being 0. 8x ended up being 0. 6x ended up being 0. 2y ended up being 0. Y again ended up being 0. 1/2 x also ended up being 0. So what we learned from our experience is that anything attached to a variable pretty much turns into a 0. So my advice to you is that anytime you actually test 0, 0 on your work is just to turn anything that has a variable into 0. We've learned how to ignore the variable, but here's what I would do. I would just turn anything that has a variable into a 0. So testing number 5 with experience is where we're just going to say this has a variable, so it's going to be 0 minus 0 less than or equal to 10. And it saves us a little bit of the work, because we don't have to put 4 parentheses 0 and do all that work, because we understand that anything times that variable is going to be 0. Now of course 0 minus 0 is 0, and then you just have to ask yourself, is that a true statement? Is 10 more important than 0? And of course it is, because 10 is bigger than 0, and so that would be true. Alright, so again, whenever you test your 0, 0, you can kind of do that step here, and that will save you from having to put the 4 parentheses 0, 3 parentheses 0. It's just a real quick shift from equation to value, so you can go ahead and get that done the way you need to. Number 6, again, if you had to test this, y is greater than or equal to negative 3x plus 6. This is a variable, turn it into 0. This has a variable, turn it into 0, plus 6. Simplify. 0 is greater than or equal to 6. Is 0 more important than 6? I don't think it's supposed to be, because it would actually choose the 6 over 0. So for us, this is false. Be sure to circle any questions you have, or any problems that you have questions on, and ask me about it tomorrow, because the first thing I'm going to do when I come in tomorrow is ask if there's anything that you have questions on, anything that I can explain a little bit better. But again, if there's a problem that I work out, that you need me to work out again for you before we get started, let me know. But like I said, that's the main thing of what we're trying to do, is just try to get this introduced so you have an idea what's going on. Again, number 7, 10x minus 3y less than negative 30, or less than or equal to negative 30. This has a variable, turn it into 0. This has a variable, turn it into 0. Negative 30 stays negative 30 because it does not have a variable. 0 minus 0 obviously is 0. And again, the question is the negative more important than the 0? But if you remember, 0 is bigger than every negative, so I think it should be choosing the 0 over the negative. So that also is false. These are the ones that will trick you the most, because again, the first thing you always think is that 0 is the worst number ever, but a negative is the worst number ever. Again, I understand that having $1 million, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, is better than having $0. But having $0 is better than owing $1 million. because if you owe $1 million, I don't think you're going to get out of that hole unless you do something really, really extreme. So like I said, the positive is bigger than zero, but again, having nothing is way better than having being in debt or having a negative. So again, it's not going to choose a negative over zero. You need to keep that in mind as you get better, as you continue to practice, and as we move forward. I think that the question on the test that you're going to have to get ready for is extremely easy. But again, you've got to make sure you prepare for that question and that you get those points, because every point you get on that test is going to bring you closer to passing that test and at least getting a score that gives you a shot to pass for this semester. Number 8, again, the last part of phase 2. This is a variable, so we turn it into 0. This has a variable, so we turn it into 0 minus 7. 0 minus 7, of course, is negative 7. Again, if you're not sure, don't ever feel too ashamed or too proud to plug that in. And again, is 0 more important than a negative? Yes, it is. And so that is a true statement. Alright. So again, the first phase is just making sure we at least understand how to look at an equation and determine whether it is true for 0, 0. And what we're going to find out in the next phase is why we choose 0, 0. Alright. In terms of the graphs, whenever we graph our lines, we want to make sure that we graph our lines all the way across the region. And what the line does is the line separates everything that is true from everything that is false. And I'll talk about that in just a little bit as we go over these. But again, whenever we actually graph, we are going to try to figure out where the true and false sides are so we can shade the true side. In other words, we want to shade the parts that are true, but we want to make sure we identify the right parts before we do that. So if you do me a favor on number 9, add a point here at 3 back, add a point here at 3 up, and then draw your best version of a line through those 2 points. Again, make sure that line goes all the way across that portion. And what you're going to do is, this line again separates everything that is true from everything that is false. The line that you graph is the one line in that whole picture that separates everything that's true from everything that's false. And so the easiest point to test, as we've seen in our work, because it turns everything into 0, is 0, 0. And so what we do to test, as you have this line on number 9, is 0, 0. So put a little open circle on 0, 0, because that's the point that we're going to test. So what we're doing here is, we know that this separates everything that is true from everything that is false. If we test 0, 0, and again, we're saying that this is a true graph, so we're assuming that 0, 0 is true. We're not going to test it yet. We're just going to look at how it works whenever it is true. So again, we have a graph. We're testing 0, 0. We find out that 0, 0 is true. Well, common sense says this. If this separates everything that's true from everything that's false, and something on this side is true, that means that everything on this side, and you might want to write this, is also true. Because again, if it is the case that this is true, it means that everything over here is true. And if we want to shade where it's true, then we would shade on this side. And you don't have to shade it extremely dark. Make sure you can still see the T's whenever you come back to your notes, so you understand that you shaded the true portion. Because again, that's what it's all about. We are looking for the true side of what's going on. So again, if testing 0, 0 says that it's true, what that tells us is that we are on the true side, so everything over there is a true statement. Alright. Again, these are just cheap graphs, so just keep following me on these graphs. If you move on to number 10, move down 3, and also move back 3, because there are 4 types of graphs that you're going to have to work with for your true and your false. So again, go ahead and draw your best graph on that. And again, remember that if this was the line that we sketched, again, I'm just drawing a cheap line, but if this was the line that we sketched, the point on this is that this separates everything that's true from everything that is false. So what we do is we put a little open circle on 0, 0 to tell ourselves that this is the point we're testing. If you remember, these graphs are assumed to be true in phase 3, and so therefore what we're going to do is put a little T by that circle, which again means that everything on this side is also true. Again, if this is true, then everything on this side of the line is true. Since we are shading the true side, then we are going to again shade this portion. But notice how this time we're actually above the line, whereas this time up here we are below the line. And again, you don't really want to think that true means go above or true means go below. You are just trying to find the true portion, and you are shading towards the true portion. that would be your answer. If this was your graph and that was true, then you would shade again towards the true portion of the line. All right. For number 11, again, moving around this origin here, down 3, right 3, just generic lines to give you an idea on what we are doing. So again, if we were to do this work here and we ended up with this line separates everything that is true from everything that is false. We would put an open circle at 0, 0 because we're going to test it. We would find out, of course, remember that this is assuming that it's true right now, and I know you're probably wondering how we know, but you're going to see that in a little bit. But again, assuming that this is true and just showing you what to do, if this was our line and this was true, again, it means that everything on this side of the line is also true, which means that we would shade towards the true side, which would be here. Again, you are looking to shade the part that is true. You're looking to shade the part that is true, which means that in that case you're going towards that 0, 0. Alright? So take a couple days of practice, which is why it's good that we have today, tomorrow, and Thursday to kind of get that practice in there before we have to move on. And then the last one, of course, if you haven't figured out, right 3 and up 3, draw your line, or the best line. Again, make sure that line goes all the way across because we have to separate the whole region. And again, remember that if this was our line, we are separating everything that is true from everything that is false. And so what we are doing here is we are going to test 0, 0. Again, 0, 0 is the easiest number to test. So we test that number. Again, this is phase 3, which says that we're shading it as true. So again, if 0, 0 was true, that means that everything on this side is true. And so therefore we are going to shade over here. Alright? So again, that is how you deal with if 0, 0 is true. And what we're learning is that whenever 0, 0 is true, everything on this side is true, which means that we stay on this side of the graph. Alright? Phase 4 is going to be shading false graphs. So again, we're going to do about the same thing we did before. So you can have these in your notes and you can kind of look at them. Again, back 3, up 3. Draw your best line through those 2 points. Again, make sure that line goes all the way through across that region. And again, in this situation here, when we test 0, 0, we actually find it out to be false. And this is where you have to be careful because if 0, 0 is false, it means everything on this side is also false, because remember, this line separates everything that is true from everything that is false. And so you can put as many F's as you want to put over here, but the bottom line is this: if we are looking for what is true and we know that this is false, that means that we don't want this side, we want to shade this side. And so we go away from 0, 0 because we know that this is false, which means that again, if this is separating everything true from everything false, it means that this is the false side and this is the true side. Alright? So again, whenever you see that your solution is false, what you're going to do is recognize that if this is false, everything on this side is false, so you pretty much jump over the line and shade the other side. Again, what you should have noticed was, if you look back at the ones that we just did, in all 4 of the ones we just did, 0, 0 was true, so we went towards 0, 0. 0, 0 was true, so we went towards 0, 0. And this question here is 0, 0 was false, so we jumped over the line and shaded. And that's pretty much what you're going to do on these things here. So number 14, again, move back 3 and down 3 so we can see all 4 instances of this situation and get our experience here. Again, if that is our line, that line separates everything that is true from everything that is false. When we test 0, 0, we actually find out that it's false because that's what we're assuming from this section. And so what we do, again, if this is false, it means that everything on this side is false. And feel free to do that if you want to on your test, but just be careful, because if you take that too far, you eventually at some point in your career will have 2 lines and that'll get confusing. But either way, on your test, feel free to just put a bunch of F's for false, a bunch of T's for true, if that helps you. But again, if this side is false and we're looking for what's true, it means we jump over the line and we shade this side. You do not need to shade it perfectly. You do not need to color it all the way in so there's no white space. What you don't want to do, if this was your line, is just kind of do that, because that's cheap and I am going to take points. So again, at least give me like a decent scribble on that side to show me that you shaded that side. But again, you don't need to do the thing where, because I've had students who outline the line and then they color everything as if it's a work of art and they do it this dark. You do not have to do it that dark. I just need a cheap scribble covering that portion and I'm good to go. Alright. Number 15. Again, down 3, right 3. Moving here. Testing 0, 0, if you remember, this is where we assume that it is false. If this is false, it means that everything on this side of the line is also false. Remember that we are looking for what is true, which means we now jump over the line and we shade the opposite of that portion. Again, just give me a decent shade on that side, showing me that you understand that this is where the solution is. And again, on that test, if you put a bunch of F's or T's, I'm not going to mark you wrong because I understand what you are doing. Here, last one, over 3, up 3. Draw your best interpretation of that line. I'm pretty sure you don't have a ruler unless you got one from the sub. But again, this is your part there. So what you're going to do here is, again, test your 0, 0. We are assuming again that 0, 0 is false. And so if this is false, that means that everything on this side is also false, which means that everything on this side is what we are looking for, and that everything over there is true. So those are our 8 situations you're going to see where it could be false and you go above, it could be false and you go below, it could be true and you go above, it could be true and you go below. You just have to make sure that you make the right call for that number. Alright? So phase 5 is doing the whole thing and putting together what we learned how to do. And the first thing we learned how to do was to graph this. So what we learned to do is, graphing this in general was to ignore y and put 2x equals 6. Yes, I know I put equals, but again, when it comes to graphing, treat this like an equal sign. That means that x is equal to 3. So just like we did yesterday, go over to where x equals 3 and put a dot. The other thing we get is that 3y equals 6, which means that y is equal to 2. And so therefore what that means is, if y is equal to 2, we go up 2, we put our dot. We then draw our line. Now today you can just loosely draw your line, but we'll talk about some stuff tomorrow that says that there might be some stuff for you to think about, but that is the line that we would draw. After that, what we're going to do is test 0, 0. Now remember, in the last section we knew what it was, but this time we have to actually figure it out. So what we're going to do here is do the work we just learned. Turn that into a 0 plus 0 greater than or equal to 6, like we did in phase 1. That means that 0 is greater than or equal to 6. Is 0 bigger than 6, or would this alligator choose 0 over 6? I don't think it would, which means that it's false. Now that is the answer that you will bring back here. So again, the work we did in phase 1 is what we're doing here. Graph it the way you learned how to. After you have your line, test 0, 0, so turn every variable into 0 and use that answer to determine this. Again, if that is false, that means everything on this graph is false, which means that we want to be on the other side of the line, which means that that would be the graph that we need to use. Alright? So again, you don't need to be perfect at this. We will go over this more directly tomorrow, and we'll talk more about the questions that you have and see it more live and give you a chance to practice it. But in terms of just overall understanding, make sure you at least kind of get what's going on so that tomorrow when we talk about it, you have some background knowledge. So again, on this, we first off, because this is standard form, we ignore the y, we get 4x equals 12. Again, yes, I just turned that into a equals because we just need the math part of it, which means that x is equal to 3. The reason x is equal to 3 is because you do 12 divided by 4, and if you have to, again, grab your calculator to do that, don't be too proud to do that, because the main thing is that you get it right. X equals 3 is on the x-axis where 3 is. Then you ignore your x and be careful, because you end up with negative 3y equals 12, which means that y is negative 4. So y is negative 4 goes here. Draw a line that we know to draw. Again, just main thing for right now is not that it's perfectly straight, but that it does go all the way across the region. We then have to test 0, 0 because that's the easiest number to test. So we turn this into 0, minus 0, less than or equal to 12. Again, this is where we have to actually use the sign because we need to know if it's true or false. That turns into 0 and 12. Is the alligator going to choose 12 over 0? I think it is because it's bigger. That means that this is true. And again, if this is true, it means that everything on this side is also true. And because we are looking for what is true, it means that we stay on this side of the line and we shade towards 0, 0. And so again, a cheap scribble would be something like this. That's good. Alright, so hopefully you're starting to see that everything just kind of comes together very easily, very basic way. Again, graph the line based off of what you know how to do. Check 0, 0 based off of what you learned how to do. And then shade according to whatever you know is true. So again, find out what's true, shade towards what is true. Number 19, graph first. This is slope-intercept form. Remember that this is telling me to take my 1 and go up 1. This is telling me to go up 1 and over 2. I then draw the best line I know how to draw through those 2 points. After I get the graph, again, because of this inequality, I have to test 0, 0. So what I do is I go over here. Again, notice there was no algebra for that, so we can just kind of do it right here. That's why I didn't leave you much room on that. So you probably just want to go off to the side of this equation to check it. But either way, you end up with 0 less than or equal to 0 plus 1, 0 less than or equal to 1. Is the alligator going to choose 1 over 0? I think it is, which means that this is true. And so because this is true, everything on this side is true, which means we stay on this side and we shade that side. Number 20. Y is greater than or equal to negative 3/4 x minus 2. In this situation, again, based off of this graph, I know this is telling me to go down 2. I know this is telling me to go down 3 and right 4. Remember, you always go right. So therefore, that's what you'll do there. Draw the best line you know how to draw. That is our line. Again, that's what we learned yesterday. That's what we learned in chapter 5. But what this symbol is telling us to do, if that was an equal sign, we could stop. But because this is not an equal sign, we now have to test 0, 0. And again, turn that into 0. Turn that into 0 because it has an x attached, minus 2. This is what we end up with because 0 minus 2 is negative 2. Your question is, would the alligator choose 0 over a negative? I think it would. Because 0, if you remember, is bigger than negative, so that means that this is true, which means that everything on this side is also true. And we will stay there. I kind of threw myself off because I thought that I would have switched it around when I initially made it, but oh well. Again, 0 is bigger than your negative 2, which is good. That is a true statement. Number 21. Graphing this, ignore your y. You end up with 3x equals negative 6. Again, just use equals when you're doing that. That means that x is negative 2. Now the key here to remember is that x negative 2 would be to the left. Then you go ahead and you ignore your x, which means you get negative y equals negative 6, which means that y is equal to positive 6. So you go up 6, and again you draw your line. Hopefully the graphing is not an issue for you. If so, make sure you get some practice on it. I think, again, the graphing is one of the easier things you can do once you get it. It's just hard to get to the point where you actually get it. But again, in terms of this test, once you see that symbol, test 0, 0. So what we do is we turn that into 0, turn that into 0, rewrite that as negative 6, and we bring it down as is. Is 0 going to be more important than negative 6? I think it is, because again 0 is bigger than every negative. That is also true. And again, if this is true, that means everything on this side, on 0, 0 side, is also true. And again, we will stay on this side with our shade. Alright. 22. y is less than or equal to x minus 3. Again, this is a slope-intercept form because y is by itself. This is the one where it's telling us to go down 3. Do not forget that there is a 1 attached to that x, which means go up 1 over 1, and graph the line the best way we know how to do. After that, again, because of this symbol, we have to test 0, 0. Turn that into a 0. Turn that into a 0. Bring down your minus 3. Is 0 going to be less important than negative 3? I don't think so, because remember 0 is bigger. It should choose a 0 over a negative, which means that this is false. And so again, if this is false, that means that everything on this side is also false. And again, if that helps you to do that, feel free to write all those F's, because remember, we're looking for what's true, which means that we'll jump over the line and shade this side. All right. -23. Y is greater than or equal to negative 2x, or negative 2x plus 4. So again, the plus 4 means go up 4. The negative 2x means go down 2 over 1. Draw your line. And that is your line for the graph. From there, you go ahead and you put a 0, 0 there, test it, turn this into 0, turn that into 0, plus 4. Again, simplifying that, you get 0 is more important than 4, which I don't think the alligator would choose 0 over 4, because 4 is actually bigger than 0, which means that this is false. Once I know this is false, it means that everything over here is also false, which means, again, we don't want to be on that side. We want to be on this side. 24. X minus 2y less than or equal to 5. Yes, I did it to you. Ignoring y, you get x is equal to 5, which is good because that's over here. Ignoring x, though, you get negative 2y equals 5, which, if you think about it, 5 divided by negative 2 is negative 2.5, which means you go down 2 and about a half. Again, that's just something you got to keep in mind, that there are decimals and fractions in math. But again, that right there is the graph that you would use. You would then test your 0, 0 the way that we've been taught. Turn this into 0. Turn that into 0. Leave that as it is. Simplify. Is the alligator going to choose 5 over 0? I think the answer to that is yes, which means that this is true, which again, as we get closer to the end, means that everything over here is true, which means that we stay on this side because we are looking for what is true. Alright. And then number 25, which is on the last one on this worksheet. Graphing this means go up 4, put a dot, go down 2 over 3, again always to the right. Draw your best line through those 2 points. But again, because of this not being an equal sign, we must now test 0, 0, which means we turn that into a 0, we turn that into a 0 plus 4. We look at this and ask ourselves, is this a true statement? Is 4 more important than 0? Of course, the answer to that question is yes. So that is true, which means that everything over here is also true, which means that we shade on this side of the line. Alright. A couple things I want to go over just to make sure. 3 problems that I just need you to write on your work here before we finish this off. Again, just 3 problems before we wrap this up, because I want to make sure we talk about what's on your test. Keep in mind that this is on your test here where you have to solve by graphing. It says, what is a solution to the graph system of equations? And so what you would do, if you remember, is you look at the 2 lines, and the part we're looking for is where this line, because remember, this line represents everything that is true here. This represents everything that is true here. That represents where both of them are true, and that is our answer. And so what we do is, remember that we always go x first, y second. So our x value means from here we go over 3. So it would be 3 comma 1. And again, you don't need to write these graphs here. I'm sorry, these 2 graphs don't need to be there, but the next 2 things I do. you probably want to write for this. Just make sure you're watching and paying attention and understanding what the answer comes from. So again, over 3 up 1 would give us the answer of 3, 1. Here, what we have is, again, this here and that here meet at this point. And again, the key thing for you to remember is that it's not 3, negative 3. It's not even a 3. This is a negative 3. So make sure you understand that you go 3 back first, which is a negative 3. And then 3 up. This does not work like slope. It works the opposite of slope, where in slope you usually go up and over. But whenever you're talking about a point, don't forget x goes first, so you're going this direction first, up and down second. That's the main reason why I wanted to put that in front of you as we get ready for our test, so you just kind of are reminded about that. Now, again, 2 more questions I just want to go over real fast because it's important. These are actual test questions that you're going to see. So again, write these 2 questions down. I'm going to expect to see those for your credit because it is only 35 minutes so far into the video, which means that you should still have a decent amount of time because I don't think it took a lot of time to write all that stuff. So B and C should actually be on your work if you want your credit. Make sure you get to them. Other than that, what we're going to do here is recognize that this is not elimination, because once we see our y equals, we're going to substitute for y. Pay attention to this because remember, we haven't finished these all the way through and we need to get ready for the test. So again, make sure you write them and think about what I'm going to do here, because that's what you're going to have to start doing. So we're going to now turn this into x plus parentheses 4x, which we don't really need the parentheses, but it's okay. Remember that the plus doesn't do anything, so x plus 4x equals 15, which means that when you combine your like terms, 5x equals 15, which when you divide by 5, you get the answer of x equals 3. You cannot stop here on the test because we need both answers. That's why it says solve the system. It doesn't say find x, it says solve. And so you now got to take that 3 and plug it back in. Remember, it doesn't matter which one you plug into, but the easiest one for substitution is the one with the 2 boxes. So y equals 4 times 3 is the best one because it gives us the answer of 4 times 3 to be 12. And you put it into an ordered pair as 3 parentheses 12. Just to show you, and you don't need to write this part, that if you took this equation and checked it, you would have turned this into a 3 plus y equals 15. You would have then subtracted 3 from both sides, and notice you would still get y equals 12, which means that you'd still get the answer of 3 first because remember that's your x, 12 second because that's your y, and that's that. One more question and we're done. Thank you very much for paying attention and doing this. Again, I just needed to make sure we could cover the information while I was gone. We will be catching back up tomorrow and making sure we cover any questions you had outside of why did I put you asleep for 37 minutes. Remember that this is elimination because you have x, y, and the numbers all lined up. And so therefore with this you got to remember that you distribute everything. 12x plus 8y equals negative 32. And again, the key thing here is that there will be negative numbers on the test, and I need to kind of introduce you to that. That's what tomorrow will be for also. Here you get 12x, 9y, and negative 30. From there, if you remember, once we've made our x's match up or made anything match up, we then switch the bottom row. So we put 12x plus 8y equals negative 32. And then we put negative 12x minus 9y equals positive 30. You then add your terms up, remembering that 12x's fade away. 8 minus 9, if you don't know what it is, again, feel free to type it in. So 8 plus negative 9 is negative 1. Remember, we don't need the negative 1, so it's just negative y. And negative 32 plus 30 is negative 2, which means that we then switch our y over, getting the answer of 2. Now again, remember that I am going to have a parentheses there waiting for you with a comma, pretty much saying that I need for you to give me 2 answers. Well, you just found the second one, so how do we get the first? You go back to one of these equations. Remember, I usually just pick the top one if it's elimination anyway. And then you solve. So take this 2, plug it in here, so 3x plus 2 parentheses 2 equals negative 8. This, of course, turns into 4. We then move this forward by subtracting 4 from both sides, getting 3x equals negative 12. You then divide by 3, getting that x is negative 4. And so what you would put on your test is negative 4 for x, 2 for y. again, thank you for doing that. Make sure that if you have time, you want to start the net, that's fine. Just make sure you start wrapping up and getting my calculators put back, because I'm not there, and I should have 23 calculators for those leaders in the room who want to make sure we don't get into another calculator war. Again, should be 23 calculators in the bin, so please make sure that your calculator goes back. Make sure that if you borrowed a pencil, you give that back, and make sure that everything is taken care of. Thank you again for doing this. Answer this last question and get your credit for your test, and have a good day. See you tomorrow.